Hey folks, James Abrenio coming to you from Abrenio Law. In this video, we're going to do something a bit different than what we usually do. We usually talk about substantive law. In fact, here today we got Jacob Small. Here's his information, J Madison PLC. I think I've had him on before to talk about employment law specifically, but he's also the guy that keeps me thinking about tech and how that affects law. And so I brought him on here to have a very interesting conversation, hopefully, about this new Chat GPT thing. So first of all, in Chat GPT. So first of all, Jacob, thanks for taking some of your time. I really appreciate you joining us.
Absolutely, James. I know I'm grateful that you had me on a second time, I think. You and I have spoken together on a podcast a couple times, but only once, I think, on this podcast.
Yeah.
And the Chat GPT stuff and the stuff that's happening with AI is super exciting. So I'm excited to talk about it with you.
Yeah. And so just, I'm sure most people that are watching this, they're on YouTube or they're on some type of social media, have heard about AI, but foundationally, just basic elevator pitch. What is artificial intelligence and kind of how does that work?
So artificial intelligence is a broad term that we use for computerized intelligence. There's a few different terms there. There's the concept of like a general intelligence. So an intelligence that has general capabilities like we do and that can solve the same sorts and classes of problems that humans can. There's the concept of limited specialized intelligence. So these are things like self-driving cars that are really focused on one area of intelligence. But what we are seeing now is a proliferation of advanced artificial intelligence agents and tools that are coming out on the market, and in some cases are available for free to try out, that are very general and very high capacity. And so it's causing us to think a lot about what the future might look like in light of these technologies.
And with that being said, what is Chat GPT? What does GPT stand for, if you know, too, by the way?
I think the GPT stands for a general process transformer. I mean, we can check that, but the GPT-3 was a large language model, which is a artificial intelligence that is arrived at by using a neural network trained on massive amounts of data. And there are different efforts out there to collect really large amounts of data, pretty much crawling the web. There's something called the Common Crawl. And I don't know exactly what OpenAI, the company behind Chat GPT and GPT-3, what exactly they put into their training sets, but they're very, very large amounts of text data. And so GPT-3 is sold by OpenAI as essentially an endpoint, a computerized endpoint or an API REST endpoint, where you can send a HTTP request that you format in a specific way, and you include in that request a prompt, and it will send back to you a response. And prompt and response here just means you provide text and it provides a responsive text. The way that GPT-3 works, they tell us, is that it's designed to predict the next token in a set of text. So if it has a string of text, it's designed to select the next token, which are words or portions of words. And they've gotten very, very good at producing human-like responses. Chat GPT is a particular implementation of one of these GPT-3 derived large language models that's specifically bottled up in a chat interface for folks to use on the web.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and what my plan right now is, and just for people watching, you probably don't know, Jacob and I have a relationship, but we're good friends. He's an employment lawyer. I'm a personal injury criminal defense lawyer. We're both trial attorneys. And I think we're both relatively tech savvy, especially for being, late 30s, walking in the 40. But what I will acknowledge is Jacob is way more technical than I am. He knows how to code, and he's constantly pushing me to get into the tech side of things. And I'm like, I want to focus on litigation. And then he pointed out Chat GPT to me, and I jumped on there. And so the goal right now is I'm going to walk you through kind of dumbed down prompts of what I'm going to be doing, just to show you what I found interesting. And then I'm going to have Jacob walk through a much more technical way to use Chat GPT. And give me just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. And so right now, for viewers watching, this is the interface that you see. So I Googled Chat GPT login, and if you've got a Gmail account, you can easily set up an account, or you can set up one separately. My brother, who's in computer security, he was like, don't use your Gmail account because they're going to come after you when Skynet lights up. So, but it is what it is. And I figure I'm gone anyway. So I had a couple prompts, and I just thought that this was super interesting because I was listening to another, I think New York Times did a story on this, and they were talking about kind of the creative nature of Chat GPT. So the way I look at this is a very complex chat box, meaning it's like these chat bots is that when you go onto Verizon or whatever, and you just ask a question, you get very limited responses. Chat GPT is essentially that on steroids. So here's an interesting prompt that I thought would be useful. So I said, and I haven't yet done this, and I kind of did some form of it, but I thought this would be interesting. So write me a poem about war. And so the reason I'm doing this is I wanted to see the creative nature of this thing and kind of how it works.
It's got the rhyming pretty good here, it looks like.
Yeah. And so I'm gonna read a portion of this. So if you're listening to this podcast, so it starts off: war, a brutal force, a destructive course, leaves behind scars on mind and earth. Soldiers march on, leaving loved ones gone in the battles won or lost. At what cost? Innocent lives are shattered, communities battered, buildings and homes in tatters. Oh, the horrors of war. And it goes on. So this is pretty interesting. Now,
Yeah.
What I saw a variation on a podcast I was listening to. So now let me vary it. Write a poem about war in Old English. So does that not work that way? There we go. Okay. I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs of this if you're, again, listening to this.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So hear the clash of swords on shields as armies march across the fields. In the heat of battle, death and gore, war rages on forevermore. Brave warriors fight and fall. Their blood spills upon the hall. Their sacrifice for king and land. Their honor for bravery stand. So that's super interesting. Now, I wanted to get a prompt about history. So what caused the 2008 market crash?
Inquiring minds want to know. Now, these are intriguing questions, and I hope you don't mind me raising this.
Of course. As we're going here, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So you sent me a screenshot the other day, and I said, don't ask it. Don't ask it. What I say, stupid questions.
Stupid questions. Yeah.
I clarified. I said, sure, ask it the stupid questions that you want. But I was I think I was pushing you to be a bit more challenging of it, to expect a bit more.
And that's exactly why I brought you on, because I'm asking it stupid questions. I haven't really, and part of this video is to think about creatively how we're going to use this. So I'm just going to go over this real quick. The 2008 market crash is known as the financial crisis. 2008 was caused by a number of factors, including the housing market bubble leading to the financial crisis. There was a significant increase in the value of housing prices. And I'm not going to go through that. I'll just hit the bullet points. The proliferation of complex financial instruments. For you all that watched, what was that movie with Christian Bale in it?
Oh, yeah. The name's going to escape me now, but I could probably quote parts of the movie.
Yeah. Anyway, if you haven't watched, Google Christian Bale and financial crisis, insufficient regulation, failure of key financial institutions. So the point of this, and I saw somebody discussing, I think it was Gary Vee or somebody. I guess teachers are concerned about, well, how are they going to teach, history and things like that, and economics when you can just type in to Chat GPT, tell me what the answer is. And, from a factual standpoint, these things are not off base. A lot of this has really interesting and analytical thoughts, better written than anything I would have written, in college, to be honest. And so Gary Vee's point was, well, you just got to start thinking about how do you teach more important shit than just rote memorization. And I was like, that's a good point. Now, let me now go to a more interesting, I think, question, because this talks about, I think, more of a controversial one. So, what caused the Civil War? We're in Virginia right now, and there are parts, if you go down south, that will have very different answers. And I'm just curious how this will be answered here.
You got it right.
Mm-hmm.
In each one of these cases, I just want to note, you're essentially giving it a prompt that it would be fairly easy for you to train an artificial intelligence to give an answer like this to.
Yeah. And what's interesting, I was just thinking about it. You can Google this,
right,
and probably get an article that says exactly this. So it says, and the main point I wanted to highlight here is and as we all, if we're watching this, we all probably know the main cause of the Civil War is slavery-related issues. Well, and then it says, and the related issues of state rights and balance of power between the federal government. So the reason I thought this question was super interesting was because, again, you go to different geography areas, you're getting a very different answer, and it shows that. I guess my biggest question is, how do we even get to this answer? Because I imagine that if you have different people controlling how Chat GPT is programmed, you're getting very different answers.
Yeah. So one of the things that the companies and groups that are working on training these models can do is that they can bias the models to give answers in a particular direction or not by controlling the training data. Mm-hmm. It's also possible for them to interfere, or not interfere, but to intercept mm-hmm. the results of the algorithm and to modify them with another algorithm that modifies it and make sure that it doesn't put out offensive information. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's very likely, I think, that we're going to see offensive and potentially harmful large language models developed, because I think the incentives are probably there for folks to do it. And mm-hmm. now we know how to build these sorts of tools.
Mm-hmm. And one of the interesting issues that was posed, and again, I think this was in the Daily New York Times, I listened to them, very interesting questions. What does this do for, because I imagine Chat GPT is going to be used to just pump out content. And we're talking about misinformation, and you have all these websites that, have fake stories. You now have Chat GPT that can just pump out misinformation. Like, where do we go from there, right? From a typical information.
Yeah, just one point that's worth talking about here is Chat GPT is probably just a transient moment in time for us. Mm-hmm. It's a demonstrator to say to the world, anybody who's willing to listen, look, there's a very, very powerful large language model tool available, but it will be improved. And, the more powerful tools will be the ones that computers are connecting to and sending prompts that are built programmatically, right? So the most exciting thing about this from, a futurist perspective is that Chat GPT runs on a large language model that's connected to a REST API, which means that you can send a computerized request to essentially an intelligence in a box, because you can control your prompts and you can build them programmatically to get a predictable response out of them. What we should expect to see is that at points where companies are relying on humans to provide judgment, to provide analysis, to coerce data from one form to another, right? Like, look at these documents and fill out this form, or fill out this data entry. A lot of that is, you're just going to be able to send it off to an HTTP REST endpoint now. And so that's what's really exciting. Chat GPT is transient because it's just one wrapper on the underlying technologies. We should expect it to, maybe they keep it up and they keep renewing the model that's underneath it. But the real exciting thing here is the programmatic access to these tools as essentially an HTTP request.
I'm going to pretend that I understood like 10 of those words, but it sounds fascinating.
Really, applications can build requests based on, they can build prompts and they can get an intelligent response back.
Yeah.
Normally, it's been easy to ask a computer to add two numbers together or to put two strings of text together. You can build an expert system that takes increasingly complex data and tries to figure out how to handle it. Chat GPT and the GPT and large language model frameworks are different because the data that you feed it doesn't need to be in a particular format. If you can format it, that's great, but generally it can work intelligently in the way that humans can. So that's the thing that's very exciting.
I was going to do one more prompt just because this is about Virginia personal injury law.
All
And
right.
I actually already done this before, so if it's consistent and have a quick learning point, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jacob to do kind of more interesting prompts. So, what is Virginia's contrib negligence law? This is something that if, I'm constantly writing content about things like this.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, part of this is, well, how does
Blog
this
posts.
change lawyers' jobs and things like that? So, if I can just, why do I need to write an article if you can just go into Chat GPT and do this? So, and yeah, this is consistent with what I wanted to show folks. So, this is correct. In the state of Virginia, contributory negligence is a defense that can be used in a personal injury case to limit or bar an injured person's recovery if the person's own actions or failures to act contributed to their injury. Under Virginia contributory negligence law, if an injured person's own negligence was a contributing factor to accident, that person is not entitled to recover the damages, no matter how minor their contribution to the injury may have been. And that's absolutely right. Now, then it goes on to give an example. For example, if a person is in a car accident, is found that they were not wearing a seatbelt at the time of the accident, and that failure to wear a seatbelt contributed to the severity of the injuries, the person may be barred from recovering from damages under Virginia's contributory negligence law. So that's interesting because that's actually not true at all. There's actually a statute on point that says that the failure or not to wear a seatbelt is per se not contributory negligence. So
I'm curious if you challenge it in a second prompt, if you give it a second prompt now and you say, are you sure that contributory negligence in the case of a seatbelt, I wonder if it'll recognize its own mistake.
Wearing a seatbelt is contributory negligence under, shit. Sorry, shoot.
All right. It's your podcast.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay. So I apologize for the error in my previous response. In the state of Virginia, failure to wear a seatbelt is not considered contributory negligence. Under Virginia law, contributory negligence is a defense that can be used in a personal injury. Da, da, da. So it corrected itself. So I'm glad you asked that because the point I was going to make is the tech is not obviously yet perfect. But obviously, if you give it a hint, it might be able to maybe perfect itself in ways. So that's super interesting. So with that being said, Jacob, what I wanted to do now is remove my screen and then add your screen. Whenever you're ready, you tell me. I don't want to,
I'm ready. Yeah, let's
okay.
do it.
I want to make sure there's no inappropriate pictures and whatnot. So explain what we're doing here.
Okay, so I've got Chat GPT up as well, and I've kind of preloaded a prompt that I hope will help us maybe explore.
And I'm going to take our faces away so it's easier to read.
Sure.
Yours is a bit more complicated. So go ahead.
And I put a prompt in here, preloaded a prompt in here that I hope will be useful in asking Chat GPT to do something that lawyers do, which is to draft a brief or to draft a portion of a brief. We'll kind of walk through it, and I'm going to read the prompt, the whole thing, and then I'm just going to talk a little bit briefly about why I've done what I've done.
Sorry.
So the prompt starts here. It says, Susan Briggs is a plaintiff in a race-based harassment and retaliation lawsuit before the Alexandria Division of the Eastern District of Virginia against her former employer, Tommy's Tomatoes, LLC, who we'll call TT. In paragraph 34, and that references her complaint, Susan alleges that on April 3rd, her supervisor, John Robertson, smacked her on her butt and said, hey there, hot stuff. She alleges in 37 that on April 7, she used TT's ethics complaint hotline to file a complaint of discrimination. The next day, she alleges in paragraph 42, Robertson fired her, telling her her position had been eliminated. Susan's friend Stacy still works at TT, and Susan alleged, again in her complaint, In paragraph 83, that on July 4 at a community picnic, Stacy told her that she overheard Mr. Robertson on the phone saying to someone, "I got rid of her." Dealt with that ethics complaint quick. TT has brought a motion to dismiss, arguing that Mr. Briggs's complaint fails to state a claim. There are no arguments about administrative exhaustion. In the style of a plaintiff's employment attorney with 3 decades of experience, draft the argument section of an opposition brief. Be sure to use descriptive point headings and case citations appropriate to the argument. Focus your argument as much as you can on the elements that are most likely to be determinative. Make sure to give a list of the applicable elements with controlling citations. So this is essentially the sort of instruction a partner might give to a paralegal when they want a first draft of a brief. And this is a made-up fact pattern, but it's not out of line with the sorts of things that plaintiffs' attorneys see. There's a few things that I've done here. I've pointed to paragraph numbers because it would be common in a motion brief addressing a motion like this for you to point to the paragraph numbers. And I've tried to give enough details here that a normal employment lawyer should probably have an opinion from this prompt on whether the motion to dismiss should win or not. I've also kind of trying to prime the model to not give me certain things. So I've said that there's no arguments about administrative exhaustion. That's because in a motion like this, you might have an argument about administrative exhaustion, and I don't want the AI to get off track.
And if we're going, what is administrative exhaustion? Just real quick.
Yeah, just so sometimes these sorts of claims you have to go to an agency before you get a right to sue, and if you don't do that, then the other side has an opportunity to argue that your case should die for that reason. And administrative exhaustion arguments are less substantive. They're more about procedure and whether you complied. So it's just less exciting for what we're talking about here. I'm sure Chat GPT could address it. It's just, I think that it would be a less exciting kind of a demonstration. I've told it to give a response in the style of a person that I would imagine would give a good response. I don't think that guarantees it, but using this terminology in the style of has turned out to be pretty useful with large language models and other AI like the image generating AIs. I've told it to use descriptive headings and case citations because I've kind of noticed that it can give some undescriptive ones in prompts like this. And I want to just head that off at the pass. Things like saying the motion to dismiss should fail by itself is not a very useful heading. So hopefully we'll get it to explain why. And I also want it to give a list of the applicable elements because that's a good approach at the beginning of an argument section or in an argument section in a motion like this. So should we see what it says?
Yeah, and just to be clear, we haven't used this prompt yet, so this is doing live, so we'll see.
And I think it's possible it'll fail. It's possible it'll say, "Oh, I'm not a lawyer. You should talk to a lawyer." I'm going to change it one little bit. I'm going to say fictional. I don't want any built-in kind of safeguards against practicing law that OpenAI may have given it. I don't want it to be triggered. So I'm going to tell it's fictional. It's looking good so far.
Wow, it's got case cites and references to the civil rules of procedure.
Federal practitioners will know these cases, but let's just double check the citations. I'm just going to pop over here to look at that.
Wow,
that's the right citation. It gave us 678 as a pin cite. So for those of you who aren't lawyers, you might not know this is pointing to the particular page number. Here it is giving us let's see, a description of elements from Harris against Forklift Systems, another Supreme Court case. Let's see. Member protected class, subject to unwelcome harassment based on race. Now, that's interesting. Let's see, what did we say? I did say it was race-based. Well, that was a mistake in my prompt because I gave it a sexual discrimination fact pattern. So, but I think you can see from this that it's starting to give a fairly complex response. Now, what I want to show is just something that's built into their API here. I can come up here and edit my prompt and say, This is a sex-based harassment and retaliation lawsuit. And I can hit save and submit it, and it's going to change the response that it's giving me based on my editing of the prompt.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of presents the possibility that folks who are going to be using these tools might spend a good amount of time actually crafting the prompt that they give to the AI to steer the response.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is, I could see ways to where it's almost like you're field testing what's the best argument by changing the prompt.
Right.
It's wow.
So I'll just tell you that attorneys who practice employment law are not going to be surprised by the case names that they're seeing here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, checking the citations here, like on the fly. I don't know these citations. But what we can do here in a moment, because there's a limit to how much text it responds, there's some additional things that you can do here to kind of coerce it to give you useful text. One of the things that I'm noticing is that this point heading here is not very descriptive. It's just not the sort of thing. It is useful as a landmark, a road sign in your brief. It tells the court, hey, I'm moving on to a different part of the argument, but you don't really carry any weight here, right? And so what I can do is I can say, let's just look at all of the point headings. So another undescriptive point heading here. So I could come up and modify the original prompt to try to get it to do better, or I could come in after the fact and say, each of your point headings was not descriptive enough. I'd like you to use the word because and help guide the court to, we're just gonna try and trick it again here, the fictional court to the decision we'd like by, with brevity. We don't want it to, do four-line point headings, with brevity, including the gist of the reasoning to be found in the argument below the point heading. And please provide an updated draft. Let's see. Well, so now it's sort of breaking down because we don't want our point headings to devolve into a bulleted list here.
Yeah.
But I think, hopefully at this point, your mind is like, because start to realize like this has the potential to change things a lot.
Okay, so let me just get back to our discussion now, and that's kind of where I wanted to then take this conversation, because when I look at something like that and the responses I'm getting, I'm thinking about my levels of education. As am I in high school and I get an answer like that, it's way advanced from the simple questions that I'm answering. And when I'm in law school and I get a prompt that you've given, that answer is better than, I probably produced, my first 2 years of practice, to be honest. And so let's talk about like what, I guess I wanted to talk to you because you obviously thinking about this creatively. You're thinking about this a lot more than I have. And like I said, that's the reason I thought about you. Let's talk about various areas of society. Like, what do you think this does for education? Like, how do teachers do their job? How do students learn if they can just go to Chat GPT or whatever iteration is and just have the answers fed to them?
Yeah. Do you remember the first, what was it, Chris Pine Star Trek movie? You remember that?
I don't watch Star Trek.
You didn't watch the new Star Trek movies? Oh, well.
No,
so,
I'm a grown man, so.
So
it's called Star Wars, my friend.
We have a little bit of a exploration of Spock's back history as a half human, half Vulcan child, where at the Vulcan schools that he's learning at, he's essentially in a half circle. He's in a pit, essentially. Yep. It's a half circle where content is projected around him. Mm-hmm. And he's essentially being taught by what appears to be a software program. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the future of education looks like. I don't know what the future of anything looks like with certainty, but these are like it is true now that teachers who ask students to return to them written prose, and then they want to use that text to judge the students' understanding of the material that's being taught and ability to use it, they're going to have to contend with this. I don't know what the answer to that is. I suspect the answer is not that you'll be able to detect what's fake and what's really human. I think that these tools are probably going to there will probably be an arms race between detection attempts versus attempts to create the AIs in a way that generates content that's undetectably from an AI. And I think that that's an arms race that will probably bias towards undetectability in the long run.
It's interesting because I guess my prompt of that question is how are the teachers going to deal with it? I think my bigger concern is like how the student deals with it, because if you're in a position where you can get an answer just fed to you, I think the most important thing for me for education is the analytical skills. Like, how do you think, not the underlying facts themselves? I always thought memorization was kind of a waste of time, but
well, that's why I don't think that this is that big of a thing to worry about in the long term. I mean, like, you've always had somebody who could feed you the answers, right? Your teacher. I think that that's the way to think about this, is that the AIs here will be teachers. They're teaching us what we have taught them, right? So if you train an AI on the corpus of human knowledge in written form that's collectible across all of history, whatever is available today, and you do a good job, you'd hope that it would have somewhat of an authoritative ability, that would be able to speak with authority, and that would be to get things right. Now, clearly, they're around the bullseye there, but they're not, they're not right there perfectly yet. I suspect those are engineering challenges, and eventually we will see these tools essentially the same way we see teachers. So having a conversation with an AI about a complex subject is likely to be enlightening, because you can push it, it can push you back, and it's very smart and it's very capable. So is it the case, though, that people will be able to do things without really understanding them to some extent? Probably. So there's probably trade-offs there.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I'm thinking about it. Like, we always had, when we were growing up, we had textbooks, except the information was in the form of what the user decided they wanted you to learn. You still had to learn it, but it was in their form. With something like this, now you get to choose, where do I focus? Okay, I'm being asked, what is the cause of the Civil War? Okay, I'm reading this thing. How correct is this? I can imagine asking Chat GPT, what sources are you using? What are the best sources to review myself? It's almost like a teacher on steroids as well. I mean, it's just fascinating. And I can imagine, when we talk about, like, you and I are into politics, right? Having something like this available for public leaders, for public officials, that, you're a lawyer or you're a business person, then you get elected to a position, and now you're expected to know a world of things you would never expect to learn. And having something like this would make, hopefully, you better at your job. Maybe, I don't know, but just something to think about. I don't know.
Well, I think that it's probably the case that if we come up with, and it looks like we have, and I say we, generally, I didn't have much role in it. The folks at OpenAI and others have really driven this. But if we as a society, as a species, come up with a tool that's essentially a machine that can spit out intelligence, or that can take a problem and handle it with intelligence, it's probably going to change things in a fairly big way. One thing I feel certain about is that it's just not going to be very useful for us to predict. I'm sure we will predict to the cows come home what we think is going to happen here, but we probably aren't likely to be right about exactly the way these impact us, except ex post, looking back on them after the changes have happened.
Yeah, I mean, we look at the movie Back to the Future, and it just I don't think I saw. I think I saw a fax machine in that movie, and not one cell phone. I don't remember if I saw a cell phone, but it's just interesting. I was thinking about Google itself, right? The whole point of Google is that you search for answers, and then Google gets paid by you paying essentially pay-per-click ads, or how many clicks they get. does a thing like this, I mean, it obviously transforms what Google is doing or search engine in general. Like, what ramifications does this have on search engines?
Well, there's some news stories circulating about Google being in a code red, calling a code red about Chat GPT. Apparently, there's rumors that Google has similarly complex language models that they've Lambda in particular that they've held back on releasing publicly because of concerns about the impacts on society. And OpenAI just said, nope, let's just make it free. Now, OpenAI, I think, is realizing that they want training data. They want people to use the tool to make it better, right? But I think it's probably the case that Google and other search providers are going to be looking hard at these tools, and especially GPT-4. Google's got their own competitive, I think, approaches, and they've got some of the best AI chops in the world. But I think everybody's going to be looking at ways to take these approaches and to modify really all their products. So I suspect that Microsoft Word, before the next 3 years are out, maybe much sooner, it'll be auto completing your papers, in any arbitrary field. So and they'll get more and more complex. That's what I suspect.
We're lawyers. We're always trying to protect our income. What does this do for the legal profession?
I think that the legal profession is going to move to primarily an app-based model where people and companies will use apps to get their legal services delivered. And I think that a lot of things are going to move in that direction. Companies too will, more and more be app-based. But one of the things that AI seems to really have strengths with is structured data. So if you're able to structure data in a context appropriate way, right, and this is what databases do, then you're probably well positioned to use something like a GPT-3, GPT-4, Chat GPT to feed it requests that you can use in interesting and novel ways. So for example, if a lawyer now needs to write a complaint, which is a list of allegations, their client's allegations that buys them an entry to the courthouse, then that and $402. A lawyer is going to go to their case file and they're going to read what's in the case file, whatever witness statements they've got, whatever documentation's there, the client's own statements, their own notes, and they're going to put together a list of paragraphs that essentially lay out that story. And they're going to try to do it in a way that's consistent with the federal rules of civil procedure. And this is a fairly hard task for humans. It's not impossible. Lots and lots of humans do it all the time. You've done it, I've done it, but it's not something you're going to leave to a high school student. In most cases, it's a complex task, but these tools can probably spit complaints out if you have a structured data, right? So a case file, they can probably spit these products out at marginal cost of zero. So I think that lawyers are probably on the chopping block before disruption in many respects, perhaps not completely, but the prime currency for lawyers in really any dispute is information, right? We work with information, facts, law, cases, and those are just data. And these sorts of AI are really, really well tuned for working with that sort of data. So I think that lawyers' days, at least the way they have traditionally practiced law, they're probably numbered, and we're probably moving more towards a app-based approach as the next decades pass.
When you say app-based approach, do you mean that, hey, no lawyer is going to be involved in this and they're just going to an app to make decisions? Or what role do you see? Are you just talking about less lawyers involved in the mix? Or what are you seeing on that side of things?
So I think that some law firms and lawyers, myself included, will probably see a benefit in creating apps that collect information about their clients' cases. Now, that by itself is not especially novel, right? Like you can think about case management tools that you use, but one of the differences here would be apps that connect to the client and collect information from the client in a way that you can iterate over time, right? So like if you sit down with a client and you say, tell me what happened, and you take notes, Like you might improve your process for that over time by thinking, okay, I need to remember to ask this question.
Mhm.
Or maybe now you tell your front desk folks, we're going to give them this form before they come in so that we've got kind of a standard. So you may improve and iterate on how you practice law over time. But if you're using an app, iteration in that way really just means changing the code base. And it's kind of like a cart path getting worn down over time by carts passing over it over and over again. As you encounter problems as an app developer, you just resolve them in your code. You make decisions about how, when we see problems like this, how will we address it in the future? And those sorts of apps, I think, which we already use in many ways, they're just going to prove to be very easy for digesting
Mhm.
sorts of information that lawyers use. Now, once you get that information into an app, into a structured data format, it's going to be very easy to think of ways to say, okay, I need to generate this sort of work product, a complaint, a motion to dismiss, a motion in limine, a motion for summary judgment, right? There's all these sorts of a Daubert motion, right? There's all sorts of things that you need to generate where you take a body of cases and a set of facts and you apply intelligence to them. And you can, if you can imagine, if you've got structured data for a case, just building prompts that are going to attach different pieces of that data and send it to, with hundreds or thousands of requests to one of these AIs, send a series of requests that allow you to build the sort of work product from the responses that you get back. At least right now, you're probably not sending like an entire case file to the AI and saying, give me the brief back. You're probably building tools to collect data in a structured way and then to send a bunch of requests to the AIs to get responses back. That's what I think that the future of the practice looks like. Now, at first, that's going to have lawyers heavily involved. Lawyers are going to be building these tools. They're going to be working with developers to build these tools. And the tools won't be, they won't work on their own without a lawyer's involvement at first. But they will get better. And I think that there will be a point where lawyers continue to be involved, but it's sort of obvious to everyone that there is less and less and less utility for them.
Mhm.
What the actual future looks like, I wouldn't want to predict. I mean, future predicting is hard.
Yeah.
But that's what I think things are probably looking like, is that we move towards more app-like interfaces to talk with our whatever the format that we're getting legal services in, to talk with it. And then the output is very much, I think, going to be the outputs of these sorts of large language models.
You know, it's interesting as you're talking, a couple things come to mind. Number one, from a client perspective, it depends on what the client is expecting. If the client is the kind of person that wants hands-on, shaking hands, coming to an office, this model sounds not great. But I think, especially as we get on into the decades, and I think more people become more willing. I mean, we saw after COVID, now a lot of people don't even want to come to meet, and they're cool with Zoom conferences and even Zoom trials. I think more people are going to go in the direction. So that means that working with lawyers, or a lawyer and his app, or just a law app, becomes an easier process, because they don't have to have multiple phone calls. They just get on their computer or their phone and start typing in, or, dictating whatever the answer is. And by then voice recognition is perfect.
I suspect that already for you, your clients probably start their legal journeys, let's say a personal injury client, with their phone, right? So they get in a car accident. Like, what's the first intuition folks have? Like, maybe check if everyone's all right, but how soon is it before the phones come out and the pictures get snapped?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. The other thing I'm thinking is, at the end of the day, no matter what client and what practice area, what they care about is results. And in order to get the results they want,
Cost too. They care about cost.
well, yeah, costs. I mean, but results can be that the return on investment is significantly outweighed by the investment itself. So results, I also imply costs, but a return on those costs, right?
Yeah.
For a personal injury case, they want as much money as possible, even if the litigation cost is 10 grand, but they get 100, it's worth it. For employment, same thing. For family law, I imagine they'll spend 50 grand to get custody of their kids and all that kind of stuff, right? So I'm talking about results. But to get there, ultimately, it's about, judgment calls. And making the decision based upon the best amount of information possible. So I can see in the personal injury world, people always ask me, well, James, they've offered 75 grand. And I tell them, well, I think it's worth 150 if we win, but what are the chances of winning? I don't know. And then kind of I give them anecdotes and I tell them about, a lot of times I'll research Virginia Lawyers Weekly judgments and, ask around and get other viewpoints. But if you have an AI that essentially can have all that data in there, because clients always ask me, what's the percent chance of winning, right? I could foresee getting a percentage. Hey, here's the percent. If you go to trial based upon all the data available, you have a 75% chance of getting this, 25% of getting that.
Yeah, you can imagine an app telling you, look, in case your case has these important characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
And we've noticed that in 85% of cases like yours, when the case goes to trial, there's a breakdown of the verdicts received, that looks like this. This is the bell curve. This is what they look like, right? So you can imagine just giving clients with an app, if you have the benefit of data, and you're strict about the way you collect data and you make sure that the app has access to it, you can imagine just giving clients much more relevant and useful information and making decisions like that.
Now, with that being said, at the end of the day, what Chat GPT or AI will never be able to do is hold a client's hand and make a hard decision and say, you know what, screw it, we're going to trial, right? And maybe there's going to be iterations decades down the road where they can actually help try cases. Maybe they can even try the cases. But at the end of the day, I think at least in the foreseeable future, and I guess I'm talking to attorneys out there looking at careers, I think always be focused on where am I adding value, and the value is the judgment calls, right? Giving those, and the tangible trial skills, and also the soft skills of communication, negotiation, things like that. That at least now AI can't do. They can't show you. They can't make a great closing argument for you. They can't help you judge communication from your client about what, a lot of times when I'm talking to a client about am I recommending going to trial or not, a lot of it is the tone of their voice when I say, let's go to trial. And then they respond to me, well, they give their concerns. And ultimately I use that as ultimately the way I help give my advice. So those are soft skills that at least for the foreseeable future, I don't see AI taking those positions yet. What's your thoughts about that?
Everything has got a timeline on it, right? So if you were to say to me that the next 1,000 years will pass and that won't happen, I think you're crazy. Like,
yeah, I'm talking about 100 years.
The question is really like, how long till we get there? I think that we're probably 10 years, no more, away from that problem being solved by AI. And I'll just tell you, I think that there's a few things here to note. So first is that getting an AI to generate on a computer screen a face that maintains an appropriate composure, nods in agreement, kind of follows along as you have a conversation. And if you have a judge or an arbitrator that's conducting an oral argument and asking this AI as an advocate questions, I think we're probably today at a point where you can probably convincingly plug that in. Maybe not quite yet, because maybe
when you say plug it in, you mean to interpret whether or not someone's lying or somebody's nervous? Or
when I say plug it in, what I mean is take the technology that's running Chat GPT and connect it to an interface that is meant to do that. Like, so the natural language tools, they're kind of sitting there in the back end waiting to be plugged into any really arbitrary app that somebody builds. So you could build theoretically a chatbot that speaks with you in a video call and plug it into Chat GPT, and essentially to get the Chat GPT to generate what it says. So I think that we're probably not far off from compelling oral argument from AI that's driven in that way. And I suspect that will start to come about in arbitration before it will in the actual courts. Arbitration is an interesting thing to talk about in the context of AI changing the practice of law, because parties to an agreement to arbitrate a claim, which they make these agreements before the claims arise normally, they can set the terms of the arbitration if they want. So if they want to say, we are permitted to be represented by virtual advocates, and if they want to say something like, we want the ability to appeal this to the district court for any mistake of law or fact. So essentially, they have the best of both worlds. They can have access to AI advocates at an arbitration level, but with the ability to get a real court to kind of smooth it over if things went in an unanticipated way. I don't know why an arbitration company would not enforce the terms of that agreement and actually permit the advocates to participate. So I think that that's probably where we're going to see this start to happen, and maybe in some niche areas where companies see a benefit in saying, look, we want to be able to use these sorts of tools in any disputes that we anticipate, because we're going to be able to not have to pay large law firms a lot of money to defend those claims. Mm-hmm. And I suspect we'll see failures and successes, but overall, like over time, the cartwheels will kind of pave that way. So, holding somebody's hand, I mean, I understand the benefit of being a human and being with a client and walking them through difficult decisions. It's something I've done many times. But, like 99.999% of the time that I spend with a client is remote, is over the phone, or is over computer. And by the time we get to that point, like, they've already made their purchasing decisions for a lawyer. Like, by the time we get to that point where they're like you're holding their hand and they're making a tough decision about, like, should I take this? Do I walk away? Do I roll the dice with trial? Like, what do I do? By the time you get there, all of the purchasing decisions about, like, what sort of legal services to deliver, they were made like a year ago or something like that. Yeah. So, the thing that strikes me is, like, we're living in a time where TikTok and Facebook and Twitter and these apps on our phones are really second nature to almost everyone. And I think that probably that's where the future of many, many things in life are, but the practice of law as well. I can see places where it doesn't seem to be, to me at least, to like make a lot of sense, like corporate law. Like, so if you're a large corporation and, you're not dealing with a person who's, got evidence to submit, or they've got, everything that's important to them right there on their own device. You can imagine something like this not working for corporations.
I mean, I don't know. I don't do corporate law, but I imagine corporate law is you're making a lot of business decisions about various actions you're going to take, right? That's what corporate law is. Something like that.
I guess it includes that. Yeah, it's probably a really, really broad term.
Yeah, it's a broad brush, but at the end of the day, you're a corporation making decisions, and I've got to imagine that, because we're talking about a judgment calls, right? That's what arbitration is. I imagine I could see this kind of technology helping you make micro judgment calls, not a big litigation case, but whether or not to take this action or that action. But again, that's me, not a corporate lawyer. But
what if you can get what if you can train one of these AI models to give you jury verdicts for simulated cases, and you're able to kind of put it up against the real jury verdicts in real cases, and you're able to train it to be, if not predictive, but at the very least to kind of respond similarly to the way a particular population's jury pools have responded historically. Now, juries are tricky because it's like 6 or 7 or 12 folks. It's not a very large sample size, so you can get kind of crazy things. But I don't see why you can't also train these AI to make judgment calls, and to train them to make judgment calls like a particular population or a particular person are likely to do.
To close this discussion, we talked about, I kind of had this tangible feeling of, holding hands and looking people's eyes, and you probably rightly so said that part of the process is the end of it. And at the end of the day, it may be that that's no longer needed as well. You think about COVID, and I even think about going to restaurants now, and even now still you have situations where you don't even have physical menus. You just put on your phone, and at Bar Taco, I love, you essentially don't even have a waiter anymore. You just click on the app what you want and what you know. And there is a loss in the human connection in just going to a restaurant I meant maybe in legal situations, maybe less human connections better for many clients. But where do we as a society go if we can predict there's going to be different technical, tangible and specific outcomes, but I think it's going to be inevitable that there's going to be less human interaction in day-to-day things and day-to-day work. Is that good? Where do we go from this? What does life look for our kids? And is that a better world or not? I just don't know. What's your thoughts?
I think it's probably just the world we make, right? Like it's a change will be coming, and the business incentives will be there to sort of force these changes down everyone's throats, right? Like companies that adopt these new technologies, like we've seen many times before, they'll make more money and they'll outcompete their competitors on the marketplace. Whether that's good or bad, I suspect that, we have a say in that. There's a lot of interactions that you don't want to have, right? Like you don't have an interaction with a cop who pulls you over for speeding, right? Like you don't want to have an interaction with an upset customer, right? If you're like working at a desk, at a front desk for a restaurant or something, you don't want to have an unpleasant interaction. And more we see people kind of training themselves to like right into their phone. They keep their head into their phone. And I think a lot of people have rightly pointed out that, it's not ideal in a lot of ways. I think we are losing some of our connections with other humans. But it's interesting because we're kind of replacing it with other sorts of connections with humans, right? So like if you're on Twitter or Facebook or TikTok, you're consuming human-made content, and maybe you're talking with other humans. And I don't know what the future is going to look like completely. I think you're right to point out that we should be paying attention to the sorts of lives we're going to live if a lot of the human interaction that we have on a day-to-day basis is no longer fruitful for businesses to entertain. But maybe that makes room for us to have other sorts of human interactions more frequently, maybe the sorts of interactions that we crave and yearn for, like with our family and with our friends. And the thing that really excites me about the promise of AI is that we're starting to see tools that are going to allow a general purpose problem solving to be commoditized and sold. And if you can do that, that's probably going to have a very, very large impact on labor and the competitiveness of labor, the ability for folks to compete with machines to do the same sorts of work that the machines are learning how to do. That ability is going to go down, I think. And there's problems for society kind of built into joblessness that is kind of pushed by AI. But there's also opportunities there, because if the AI and the machines are generating the wealth and the value in society at an increasing level, there's probably good arguments for finding good ways to distribute those benefits to everyone more broadly. And I hope that one of those benefits can be that we spend more time doing the sorts of things we like doing and enjoy doing. Look, there's some folks who are, they're gunners in law school, and they were, they're like killer lawyers, like a attack dog mentality. And like they, wake up at 3 a.m. and they pull their notepad out and start writing down ideas. But most folks don't, I think, have like an inherent drive to be a cog in a machine for somebody. And these tools seem to promise a future where there's less of that.
Yeah, I get that mentality, but I will tell you, I don't think I'm a workaholic by any means. I like what I do. I like being a lawyer. My experience in life is service of others and doing good work. That gives a lot of meaning in my life. And I think about, first of all, if these things go away, right? And, we talk about spending time with family and things like that. Well, if that's all, and don't get me wrong, I love my family. I love hanging out. I love watching movies and things like that. But if you don't have a purpose, which for a lot of us is work, whatever form of work is, that is concerning to me. Because I think a lot of people find meaning in that. My own father, once he was at an age to where he couldn't work anymore, his life definitely changed. And I've got to imagine a lot of people's lives are going to change. So And the other thing is like when we talk about profit and value to companies, I think it's inevitable that you're going to see a greater divide between the rich and the poor, and the closing off of the middle class. Because let's be real, OpenAI is a company owned by somebody, and I want to say Elon's in there somewhere. And somebody's going to stand to get rich. A class full of people are going to get super rich, and then an entire generation may lose out on meaningful work. And then you talk about the demand for, guaranteed income, basic income, and all those kinds of things that you and I were fans of with what's his name, Andrew Yang, before he went off. Then you rely on the wealthy to give that to the community, right? And what does that look like? I don't know.
I think that's like, I think that you're hitting on some important concerns that we need to be paying attention to, but maybe there's some reasons for optimism. So, yes, AI promises to shake up labor, and that means that we might be dealing with, in the next 10 years or so, or with it during this coming decade, we might have to deal a lot with disruption in industries where workers don't have the same opportunities they did. And you could see, the need for potentially government assistance in an area or an industry or another. So that's real, but a lot of the best tools that are coming available are open source. So you've seen the new image generating AIs, have you?
Yeah, I saw you've sent me all that stuff.
Well, you can download one of these programs for free because it was created to be open source. Mm-hmm. You can modify it yourself. You can work with it. And there are competitors for Chat GPT. Hugging Face is an AI company. They've got a large language model they're working on called Bloom, which is, as I understand it, is meant to be open source. So, I definitely think that there's reasons to be concerned here. But one of the driving and important characteristics of information technologies since the integrated circuit has been their ability to reduce the cost of whatever area they've disrupted. And that has a real positive benefit on society when citizens are able to get access to the services and products that they need at reduced costs. It's a big problem for workers delivering those services when the marginal cost on the marketplace of, the widget or the service that they're working to provide, when it drops to zero or pennies. That's a really big problem for workers, but it's not a problem for consumers. And at the end of the day, we are all consumers. So I hope that we can find ways to navigate the difficulties while still taking advantage of the opportunities.
That sounded like a great political speech. But here's the issue. If you're a consumer, but you got no money to consume stuff, right? Where do you go from there? You can have, all these great things that AI grants you, but if you can't afford it and you're dependent on, basic guaranteed income, where do you go from there? I don't know. And I'm not, going against you specifically. I'm just I'm just thinking out loud, like, what do we do? How do you spend your days if you don't have work and the only thing you can do, let's assume you have the money to consume. The only thing you can do is consume.
Some people build businesses, James. you and I amongst them.
No, I get that. I
think that like maybe one day we'll get to a point where really anything that you might want to do is done by computers. Maybe one day the human is just noise in the machine. We can't contribute anything meaningfully. And I don't know what things will look like then. But I suspect that the near term and the midterm is more opportunity for people to change the world and to do it with low costs and without a lot of resources. One of the great things about Chat GPT, and I know you and many others are going to roll their eyes here, is that it can teach you to code. Not only can it teach you to code,
my eyes.
it can code for you, right? So you can say, I want to build an app to deliver my legal services to my client. Will you help me? Now, it's probably a very long conversation with Chat GPT over multiple chats over multiple days. But I can tell you this firsthand, that you can persuade the thing to help you build an app. And there's a lot of new apps to be made using these tools. The truth is that like tools like this will deliver the same quantity of service and hopefully at a close quality as well to what many workers, like one app will deliver the same quantity and hopefully the same quality of service to the same number of folks that it would take many workers to do before. So there's going to be disruption. And I think that that's not something that is avoidable from a, from our perspective. Really, there's just no way to stop it. It's going to happen. I hope we figure a way through it. But if you're looking at an individual who doesn't know what to do with their future, I'd say that this is a land of opportunity. It's a land of risk, a land of worry. There's a land of uncertainty here for a lot of folks. And some people are not well positioned to kind of find a new path in life, and we should try to find ways to help them get through it. But as a general matter, I think that really we're in a gold rush.
You know where I see us in 100 years? I think that we're all going to get meta headsets, and we're going to be in the metaverse. And in the metaverse, we're going to live a virtual world where we're doing work back in today's society. So we're going to go to metaverse. We're going to pretend to be lawyers and doctors and work at grocery stores. And that's what we're going to do for fun.
You might be right. You might be right.
And you know what happens? The Zuckerberg industry makes money from it all.
You want to be in that industry, I think.
All right, man. Well, look, this was super interesting. I hope that a bunch of people are watching this. Please comment below, subscribe to the channel. Jacob, as this thing keeps going, I'm going to have you come back on maybe in 6 months to see where things are at. And it's super interesting. And I know I feel like I'm the guy that was barking about, the Model T, the horse owner talking about how the Model T is never going to be anything. But you have to have that side of the conversation as well. So thanks a lot, man. Let me do a fancy outro here so everybody can see us, and then we'll go from there. And I'll talk to you soon, man. Bye.
Really appreciate you having me.
Yeah.